Alright, so now we're getting on to Dave Rubin. Here we have something from right after Russia invaded. Okay, so corporate press really wants us to nuke Russia. Transgender acceptance in Ukraine is not widespread. Changing legal documents, etc., etc. Yeah, not sure exactly what that has to do with anything. Interesting community note regarding Tucker's adventures in Russia. So basically, talking about how Tucker Carlson misled people on his shopping adventure in Russian grocery stores, where Russians actually spent a lot of their salary, despite Tucker Carlson claiming that was really cheap, but Russians spend about 60% of their salaries on supplies and that sort of thing. All right. This is what the military-industrial complex doing what they do best: wars, weapons, destruction. Jordan Belfort, the real Wolf of Wall Street on Russia, the media, and more. That's very interesting. So basically, Jordan Belfort probably has ties to the Russians. That's interesting. So literally a major scammer, and that's yeah. So it's like, I mean, are you surprised at all? Right? Because of course these scammers all have links to Russia. Like, just look at how many crypto accounts, right? Like, they're all in on Russia, right? Like, all in. Oh, and yeah, wild appearance of David Sachs. Oh, right. Near really same year of the invasion too. Quote, if you basically delegitimize anyone who is speaking up for peace as somehow being pro-Russia, all that's left is greater escalation, with the logical result that we could find ourselves in a war with Russia. So it's for this guy is a venture capitalist who has deep links to Russia. He's also from South Africa, so I'm going to say that he is probably one of these guys who is obsessed with this new right paradigm, right, where it's like, oh, we can go and be white guys and authoritarian control places, right? Like, I'm going to say that this is very much the David Sachs mentality, even if he doesn't want to go and express it as such. I'm sure he's probably let slip a few times. Wouldn't be surprised if Musk had a pretty similar perspective on that whole thing, right? All right, and then, yeah, so it's like, they always talk about this for peace, right? When the reality is that peace is, yeah, it's like, you don't go and peace out with an invader by going and saying, oh, you can go and have a bunch of our territory. That just goes and encourages them. And Russia's being encouraged in this way for, like, years now, right? Like, after World War II, they got a piece of Finland, despite the fact that they were literally the aggressors in the war against Finland. They took part of Germany, which, all right, like, I guess, but you know what? That little piece of Königsberg that they seized, like, I can tell you that is literally where the Teutonic Order went and deported all of the Prussians after they went and defeated them. They literally deported them over to that area in Königsberg. So most of those people in Königsberg were actually going to be descendants of the Balts and that, right? Like, just so. And then they were the ones that got expelled over to Germany, where they had to go and be part of the Germans, right? So it's like all that sort of stuff goes on, and they took a part of Japan, despite, again, Japan, they were literally the ones who declared war on Japan, right? Like, at near the end of World War II. And so they took an entire part of the Japanese territory, an entire part of the Chinese territory. So the point is, Russia's been doing this for ages, right? And then when the Soviet breakup happened, that's literally the first time that the Russians got slapped across the face and told that they were going to lose territory, and they've resented it ever since. Because if you go and look up what their ideological proponents say, they're all like, oh, we are Russia, we have to go and be this ever-expanding, vastness that goes and expands in every direction, right? And with the end result being that they won't be happy until they've expanded to all the earth and then over to the stars, right? Like, that's literally what they want to go and do. So they won't be happy until they go and do that. Whereas, it's this ridiculous stuff, this ridiculous mentality, and that's why it has to be stopped. It has to be dealt with. And all these guys who want there to be like this peace out on Russia's terms, where they get to go and seize and hold a bunch of the territory that they control, it's like just ridiculous. This just goes and rewards them for going and fighting in this way and acting in this way. But of course, that's what all the, again, David Sachs, he might have been more subtle at this time, but now we know what this guy is now about, right? Like, there's no doubt what he's about. Alright, Former U.S. ambassador to the UN Nikki Haley on Russia's last Ukraine, how to negotiate from strength, why Putin didn't attack while Trump was in office, and more. Okay, so it's an interview with Nikki Haley there, and of course this is before the presidential race. I think that Dave Rubin has said some very choice words for Nikki Haley ever since, because of course Nikki Haley has a better, she, unlike Trump, she actually has the foreign policy know-how to know what to do. So in terms of foreign policy, if Nikki Haley or Mike Pence had gone in as the U.S. Republican presidential candidate, you wouldn't have had to go and worry about the U.S., at least on the point of view of foreign policy. Like, you can talk about domestic policies. I don't even know. I don't think Nikki Haley is particularly. I think she's pretty centrist on domestic policies as well. But point being that that's one of the problems, right? Where you're nowadays, you have one candidate who you cannot rely upon at all for their foreign policy, which is Donald Trump, and you have another candidate, which is Kamala Harris. You hope that she's not quite as milquetoast as Biden has been, because Biden has been mediocre on foreign policy, right? Like, he hasn't been a failure, but especially in the recent year, and part of that is, again, because of Republican obstruction and that, he's been kind of mediocre on it, right? And so Nikki Haley, and of course I should mention that there are a lot of other Republicans that are decent on foreign policy, right? So it's like they will pass stuff. It's just the Republicans have always had this weird. Well, if you go and look up their doctrine on how they pass bills in Congress, you'll understand how even a few people who are just obstructing them can go and wreck the entire thing, right? Because their ideology is that we don't pass bills if we have to go and rely upon the Democratic Party to go and do it. That's literally their idea. And so that's why they get constantly obstructed, because even just a handful of people disagreeing with them can go and entirely throw their entire goals, their entire ideas out of whack. So that's how the MAGA managed to get in, right? Similar deal with how most elements of the new right have been able to get into power in various different places, right? It's like you look at how Reform, for example, in the Reform Party in the UK, like the Conservatives, in a lot of respects, they wouldn't have won that election, right? But they wouldn't have lost it as dramatically if the Reform Party hadn't actually existed, because they would have forced Labour into like a minority government, and then Labour would have had to go and make some deals, right, with some other parties. But as it is, what ends up happening in places like the UK is that they go and split the vote, and that's sort of what the point of the MAGA Republicans is, and that's how they go in and pressure people, is that they go and split the vote and say, unless you go and do what we want, we're not going to go and support you. And so they might, especially at the start, they might have only been a handful of people, but that handful can go and influence what is happening for a much larger part, right? Because if you rely upon everyone to go and pass your stuff to go and get you into a majority government, and then 10% of your party says, we're not going to do this unless you go and switch, go far right, well, suddenly you're now an issue where you have to go and talk with those people, you have to go and deal with them, and then you have to go and acquiesce to them. Same thing happens with, this is how very left-wing politics get into like the center-left parties, right, where it's like, or the center parties as well, right, where it's like, unless you go and acquiesce to what we're doing, well, we won't vote for you, and if we won't vote for you, then you're going to go and get these, the conservative types of, right? This, by the way, is why I'm unironically for direct democracy, right? Because direct democracy, that completely nerfs the power of extremists in your society, like just completely takes it away. I'm sure it has maybe it has other issues that you can point to, but you know what? Like, taking away that power is, I think, very much worth it. But anyways, I won't go too much farther on that. All right, I'm a simple man, so help me out here. How does the border deal, which allows for 5,000 illegals a day plus an unlimited amount from non-continuous nations and gives $60 billion to Ukraine, do anything to serve the interests of America? We already have the laws we need. We just need to enforce them. All right. So basically, here's the deal, right? Where this is, so basically the assumption is that when you're dealing with an alien, right, or an illegal migrant who is not from one of the Central American or South American countries, the general idea is that they've obviously flown into like Mexico and then they've gone and crossed the border. So what that already says is that there's some reason that they're doing that. Usually, I mean, again, not all of these are going to be valid, right? But there are some people who are doing that just because they want refugees or refuge or asylums. Um, so you have to take that into account. That's probably what the border bill is doing. But again, that's like we don't know exactly what this whole element is doing, and those will be the vast majority of these will be the vast minority of people, right? Because the vast majority are going to be coming from South America, Central America, these sorts of places. Very oftentimes from like the places they're more Native American too, right? Like they're you're not seeing like the Euro American populations of South America, Central America, mass migrating to the U.S. Right? It's usually from the very poor regions, right? Um, all right, and then once more, the $60 billion that is being invested largely in U.S. infrastructure, and basically it is to go and get replacements for military gear that is being sent over to Ukraine, and it's only a minority of that is being earmarked for actually being spent in Ukraine. It's like you're looking in, it's like billions. It's not even really tens of billions, right? There's being sent for the Ukrainians to go and spend in the country, and most of that, to give you a clarification why that is, it's because the Europeans, for example, confiscated a bunch of money from the various different Russian businesses that were being, held in European banks that would have been, of course, used to corrupt the various elements of Europe, and this was a pretty massive fund, and they're going to transfer that over time to Ukraine, right? So Russia will pay war reparations to Ukraine whether it likes it or not because they are the aggressor and that is what they shall do. And they wrecked the country so they can go and rebuild it. All right, and then we have Dave Rubin again. How about we take the billions en route to Ukraine and rebuild Florida instead? Once more. It's like Florida and a bad hurricane season or something. Well, guess what? Like Florida is once more. If Florida was an actual country, it would be one of the 20. It would be in the top 20 richest countries in the world. Okay, so, and Florida is used to dealing with hurricanes. It has emergency services that are used to dealing with hurricanes, rebuilding from hurricanes, etc. So yeah, Florida can go and handle itself. And of course, there are federal funds already for dealing with things like natural disasters and that. Again, the U.S. is very well prepared to have all these services. And of course, with these conservative types, they wouldn't send money to go and rebuild people's houses and that. They just wouldn't. That's not in their mentality. All right, the U.S. has given Ukraine over $20 billion with no receipts, yet Uber feels the need for me to give more. What's really going on here? It's an option to go and donate to charity. And so he's already complaining about there being an option to donate to charity. It's like, I remember Ukraine has like massive amounts of migrants that have been forced, like refugees that have been forced into various elements of Europe. It's been had massive number of refugees that's having to host on its own territory. So it's like, they need money to go and do that. Like, it's just how things work. Joe Biden wants Ukraine to win a war it can't win, and Israel to lose a war it can't lose. So once more, again, let's like they have this double standard. These are a certain portion of these new right types, right? This is for like the Charlie Kirk sort of mindset where it's like, oh, we're going to support Israel and then hate Ukraine. It's like this weird dichotomy, especially when you get into like, oh, who funded Hamas? Well, Putin is the one who funded Hamas. Iran is the one who funded Hamas. China has funded Hamas. Like, literally, the opponent countries of America are the ones that funded Hamas, and they're the ones that are attacking Ukraine, right? Like Russia and Iran are both attacking Ukraine. Like Iran supplying weapon systems to Russia. So the point being that, like, you can't go and separate out these conflicts like a lot of people do. Like, there's, I know on the pro-Ukrainian side, there's also kind of a side that we call the bleeding hearts, right? Where they're supportive of Ukraine because they're the underdog. They also go and support, like, Hamas because they're the underdog. It's like, this isn't good, cohesive geopolitics. But even that faction at least has an idea as to why they are supporting, Gaza in the war against Israel, right? Like at least they even have that. Like these types have absolutely no reason why they're supporting, just Israel and not Ukraine. Like just none at all. So again, like I think the most coherent perspective is that you support Israel and Ukraine and Taiwan as well, right? And then if you're the type who goes and is on the Russian side, that you're supporting like Russia, Hamas, Iran, and China, right? Like that's how it works. I think those are coherent ideas geopolitically. I greatly disagree, obviously, with the supporting Russia position, but it is coherent geopolitically simply for the fact that it's supporting of a faction. It's about the same. Like if you're going and say, oh, it'd be like if you. Yeah, it'd be like if you're in World War II, right? And then you've said, I do not support Poland, but I support China. I do not support Poland against Germany. I support Germany invading Poland, but I do not support Japan invading China, right? That would be a incoherent position, right? Because it's like, oh, you're supporting China defending itself, but you're not supporting Poland defending itself. And it's incoherent, especially when again, China and Poland are both allied powers, right? Like, and China, of course, being the greatest example of a forgotten allied power to take tons and tons of losses, and then people don't even ever acknowledge that you went and fought in World War II. It's pretty bad. Just yeah, it's like they know you from like one Japanese army war atrocity, right? Like, and then just nothing else about what you did in World War II. All right. Back in studio with plenty to catch up. Trudeau backtracks, Russia/Ukraine, vax mandates disappearing, and more. All right, so again, this is the sort of thing that he's. I should note that this is a guy, right, Dave Rubin, who was initially in that sort of TPUSA position, right, where they're like, the war is tyrannical, and then he's suddenly someone who goes and, of course, changes his position. He's not one of these guys who's as dramatic as like your Benny Johnsons of the world. He's a little bit smarter to go and conceal why he's going and doing this, but yeah. Alright, this is an interview with Ron DeSantis. We need to end this war. No blank check. Europe needs to step up, and anything we do should be in America's national interest. Okay, so again, DeSantis is. The irony is DeSantis still managed to be better on foreign policy than Donald Trump, but DeSantis' big deal is they wanted to go and pick essentially fights with left-leaning corporations. That was his big deal, or his big promoting point. So again, like, Donald Trump really is the worst element, like the worst candidate to choose for, what the conservatives of America allegedly want to go and do, right? Because it's like, if you want a coherent foreign policy, you would pick Nikki Haley or Mike Pence. If you want this incoherent blather, right, like you go with Donald Trump. It's like Ron DeSantis, if you want to go and just stick it to the corporations, essentially, like, but of course only like the left wing corporations too, right? Because like, DeSantis, he'll take on Disney, but like, it won't take on the Republican leading corporations, right? That's just so. At least that's the thing with like. You do see that with the Democrats, right? Where it's like they at least do have a plan for reducing corporate power in the U.S. I know it sounds, certain people it sounds odd, but like they do have a plan. Like, there is a reason why like your Googles, for example, have that lawsuit. That's like you need to be broken up into smaller pieces till you don't have quite this amount of market control, right? It's like there's a reason why they're doing that argument, right? They're trying to address that, and of course Donald Trump would not address that. Donald Trump would very much be someone who big business could support, and of course that's why you see a lot of the media. There are a lot of media elements that have gone and done a 180 on Trump, right? They're going and supporting him now, right? Or at least not doing what they were doing before. So certain media elements still criticize him, but all of them still. All right, this is from again the year of the invasion. Just transferred my life savings to Ukraine. Hope my social credit score goes up. Yep, again, it's like this making this joke at the behalf of Ukraine. People send money to Ukraine, and it's like comparing it to communist China, right? Like, just ridiculous stuff. Crazy inflation, disaster, supply chain, war in Ukraine, open borders, Ministry of Truth, mentally compromised president and vice president for different reasons, and are trying to get us to forget about all that with 8-month baby murder. I like her chances. Again, not what's happening, right? Like, both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have both when said, we're not supportive of, late stage abortion. Like, even most of the liberal states, like, or I should say left-leaning states, right? Well, liberal again being more like the centrist term, right? Like, but then again, like, liberal sort of factors into this too, right? Because centrists usually don't have like a very hardcore position on, like they're not really like they're mostly pro-choice people, right, in the center. But anyways, so the point being that they all have like these. Usually, it's like 3 months around that maybe for like abortion, right? It's like you're not supposed to, you're supposed to go and deal with the abortion during that time period because otherwise it gets kind of it gets too grotesque at a certain point, and especially like late stage abortion, like again, it's like that's not being advocated for by the standard political parties. That's more the sort of thing that you get from like a hyper radical on the issue. So that's just dealing with that. All right, and he's quoting Benny Johnson here. Breaking: massive explosion reported at a metal manufacturing plant in Bedford, Ohio. Dave Rubin: quick send Ukraine $10 billion. Yeah, it's like, so it's more like this guy thinks that he's a big clown, and he's like, oh, we're sending Ukraine so much money. Again, it's like, look at this. Look at how much greed this is, right? It's like, so $10 billion, just for comparison, the U.S. population is 350 million, right? So if the U.S. did indeed send Ukraine just $10 billion randomly, that would be $30 per person, right? Yeah, about $30 per person. Actually, even a little bit less, right? Maybe because of, okay, we'll give it that, certain percentage of the population doesn't go and pay taxes, and we'll ignore the fact that the U.S. has massive corporations that reel in tons of money from around the planet. So we'll say that your average person pays $60. Okay, 60 of your tax dollars, going to fund an ally. It's like, and what do you pay in taxes a year? Like if you go and make like is it tens of thousands? Like for your average person, like 10,000 for your average person, like. Yeah, it's like, so that, because the average GDP in the U.S. is what, like 70,000 or something? So maybe 10,000 taxes, 15,000. So it's like, okay, so you said $60 of that to Ukraine. Do you see how ridiculous this is? Like, the sort of points that they're making, it's just so much just ridiculous elements that they're coming in with them, right? Like, that's the thing. Like they just want you to go and hear a big number. Like they never want you to go and think about that, what that big number actually entails. Because when you actually go and break it down from a large scale population perspective, it isn't actually a big number. It's actually a very small number. All right. Brent Scher. My wife just alerted me that the official at White House advice for moms of baby formula is to call your doctor and ask for free samples. All right, and Dave Rubin says, at least Ukraine got an extra $40 billion. Clown faces. Once more. Again, most of that is not being invested in, it's, again, mostly, especially at this point, like, that was the equipment cost, right? That was literally equipment that was in storage that was going to get, mostly destroyed. Like, it would have been destroyed if it had been sent to Ukraine. It's like, that was the dollar value of it when it was created, and they're also funding the replacements for that, right? So it's like, and yeah, so it's like, well, what are they supposed to do? Like, baby formula, like the shortages of that, like, look at the date here, 2022. Like, literally, what you're seeing here is that there is, coming out of COVID, right? There is a very, there's a moderate surge in, babies, and then there is this, so there's been people have been used to, the corporations have been used to there being a certain demand, and so they've reduced production, to go and meet that demand. And then when there's greater demand, well, then you get shortages, right? Until productions can go in and scale up. But the thing is that you don't just go and snap your fingers and go and say, oh, create a baby food formula factory overnight, right? Like, this isn't how that works. Factories take, 6 months, 9 months, a year, sometimes even more, depending on the scale, right, to go and build. So you don't just go and snap your, fingers and say, oh, just go and immediately create this factory, right? It's just, things take time, right? And so, as we saw, that was a temporary shortage as well. So, anyways. Okay. So, this is Dave Rubin quoting a guy named Maj Nawaz. Biden, COVID, Ukraine, those apologizing for being wrong about every single issue. Okay, sure, now, STFU and about everything, and listen to those you labeled stupid, those mourning due to your lies, those you punished, all right? And Dave Rubin says, politics does weird things. I've watched extremely bright, decent people totally go off deep end while others get the big stuff right, despite some misses, myself included. Biden was obviously going to be a disaster. COVID was a scam after 2 weeks, and Ukraine mission creep was clear, okay? And wrong on all of those last points there, right? Biden has not been a disaster. Biden has been a very middle tier president, okay? Like, that's just the reality. And he hasn't been weak like Obama would have been on this sort of issue, so he's been much stronger than the previous Democratic president, right? He's done a lot more for the country. He's done a lot more clean up things, okay? So he's been better than Obama. He's been better than Trump. Like, you can't go and deny that. He's been better than both of them, okay? He's faced a lot of difficulties. There's geopolitical conditions currently that are very much testing the limits of liberalism in society. We'll see if liberalism can survive or if it cracks. We know that there are a lot of people who are already preparing for a time if it cracks. You've seen people talking about what essentially you do next if your liberalism fails simply due to not being able to go and ideologically cope with some of the stuff around the world, or alternatively liberalism succeeds and Fukuyama is right that a lot of this stuff that you're seeing around the world is just a bunch of angst because people essentially are too prosperous and then they just want something to go and complain about, which of course is the, as we're seeing with these upper middle class brats, right? Like, that do like a bunch of protests and that sort of thing. Well, that's, basically they're what Fukuyama is talking about, where it's like your opponents are now people who simply have too much money, too much time, and they want something to go and complain about and be angsty about, right? So, that's the Rubin. Okay. This one's interesting. Not so much. I don't care about the topic, like the joke that there's a guy who wants to go dress up as Darth Vader, right, for president of Ukraine. But it's interesting who exactly he is talking to here, right? It's Gina Grod and Jimmy Dore. Jimmy Dore, right? The very alt-left figure, right? So he's 2014, he's talking to them. I don't know if his politics were different around this time or if he has adapted. Of course, in 2014, right, that guy we just looked at, right, Benny Johnson, like, remember, he was hyper supportive of the Biden, right, Euro Biden, and then he went and became like this Trumpist over the years, right? So just interesting that there's been this sort of connection for this amount of time. All right. Viva Frei. I don't fully understand the... okay, so Viva Frei, to clarify, is part of this group called LawTube, okay? This conservative new right group called LawTube, okay? It's on YouTube, and we'll get into that later. There's some interesting stuff that we'll talk about there. Very interesting. You have to wait until the Defenders section for us to get into that, but yeah, it's... going to be very, very amusing, I think. But anyways, so Viva Frei, though. I don't fully understand the nuance of the conflict in Russia/Ukraine, but one observation that is undeniable: inept leadership in the West has led to aggression in the East. When at Justin Trudeau and at President of the United States talk tough, no one takes them seriously, and everyone suffers. All right, so reminder, that's them kind of gloating and thinking, oh, this is going to be, just like it was back in 2014, where Obama's response was absolutely pathetic, where Obama just, rolled over and died on, Ukraine and Georgia, that had to go and, for his magnanimous troubles, he then had to go and, participate in Syria and Libya, right? Like, just ridiculous stuff, right? And then, of course, his failure to respond adequately to that is was, of course, what led to Putin's invasion in the first place, right? Where Putin thinks, Joe Biden's going to be weak like Obama is. I can just go and roll over this place. And if I do it fast enough, then nobody will go and complain, which is why I was trying to do, shock and awe and blitzkrieg, right? Those were his maneuvers. And, of course, reckless maneuvers did not pay off for him, and Ukraine held and then got support from everyone. And, of course, Joe Biden did end up being pathetic, right? So the thing, though, is that so they expected that to happen, right? And then they were, all talking up Trump as, Trump, Putin didn't invade when Trump was in office, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? All right, Dave Rubin, Bing, you don't have to understand every in and out of Russia/Ukraine to understand the basic human element of what drives politics. Nobody fears or respects Biden because he's senile, weak, and surrounded by half-wit, incompetent, diversity hire stooges, all right? And, of course, turned out to be entirely incorrect. All right. All right, and that's basically all we need from Dave Rubin. So, again, much less a figure who goes and mocks Ukraine, mocks sending money to Ukraine, isn't saying things that are directly pro-Putin. He's not Benny Johnson, who's, repeating all these different propaganda talking points. But, of course, that's, in a sense, what makes some of these people, like this guy, kind of a bit more subtle in the danger that they, pose to Ukraine, because, no, they aren't, doing things, they aren't making talking points like they're obviously propaganda that's being fed to them by forces that are associated with these countries. They just come across as guys who are like grumpy conservatives who say, I don't want my money being spent in foreign wars. I don't want it being sent to any foreign countries. I just want to go and be a little isolationist in America. Like that's basically him, except of course for Israel, right? Like guys like him, again, they make this exception for Israel. In his case, of course, it's going to be because he's, as Dave Rubin, as that name suggests, right, he's Jewish, but he's also associated with Ben Shapiro. So, again, a bit of an odd guy in terms of who Tenet Media is bringing in. He's like the odd one out in terms of some of his politics, I'd say, because like all the others are very kind of a lot more fanatical about their various different things. All right, Lauren Southern. So this is going to be a pretty similar situation with Dave Rubin, right? Where it's like Lauren Southern is an influencer. She's like her entire thing is that she's like relatively attractive woman from Canada who does conservative politics like she did. She got her journalistic start in an outfit up here called Rebel News, which is like our right-wing, it's one of our primary right-wing media sources. It's run by a guy named like Ezra Levant. Done some like they've done some stuff involved with free speech and that sort of thing in Canada, where they've gone to like trials and that sort of thing for it. And anyway, so there's like them, and then there's like the National Post, and then the Toronto Sun, the various different Sun media organizations. So those are kind of like who in Canada you're dealing with in terms of the right-wing journalism, right? But anyways, so this is Lauren Southern, and of course she's going to be the same thing as David Rubin, right? Where she's like, we shouldn't be sending money over to Ukraine, etc., etc., etc. All right, so January 25th, 2022. Why are the U.S. freaking out so much about an invasion while Ukraine are telling them to chill? No, Ukraine was not telling them to chill. What Ukraine was doing, what Zelensky was doing, by the way, and this is for everyone who calls Zelensky a warmonger, Zelensky literally, in a last-ditch effort to go and stave off war with Russia, right, an invasion from Russia, he went and he withdrew troops from the front lines in a lot of areas so that they wouldn't be on the border areas with Russia. He withdrew them, and for his attempt to go and be a peacemaker, he got invaded, and then the troops were not in their positions, their defensive positions in these areas. And, of course, that meant that Russia was able to capture a lot more territory that would have been able to had the Ukrainian troops been in their, developed positions that they were in at the start of the war, right? So that is a big problem that we had, and of course Zelensky got a lot of criticism in the early days for that, right? Like that was a big criticism of Zelensky, and it gave the impression that the Russians were much more competent than they were actually. So of course, what happened is that the Russians drove towards Kyiv. The Ukrainians held them at Kyiv, right? Then destroyed those columns, and then that was a very big success. And then the Azov Battalion, and then the Marines, and then the National like a territorial defense unit, they were holding in the city of Mariupol. And of course, the Russians are so obsessed about Azov that they went devoted excessive forces to going and trying to eliminate the Azov Battalion. And so Azov just had to go and hold them in that city, which they did, right? They did very courageously with the Marines and the territorial defense forces. So they held them very courageously in that city to the point where they were like, they retreated to Azovstal eventually, which is like this massive production factory. They're fighting the Russians there. So basically they held them and they did that delaying action, and that essentially bought the Ukrainians, especially in the south, a lot of time. So it's like all these things happened, right? And so there was a reason why people were looking at the Russian buildup of forces along the border and going, there's going to be an invasion. And again, Ukraine tried to go in and stop the invasion by doing a peace offering to the Russians. And of course, for their trouble, they got absolutely, they got overrun in the border areas, right? And by the way, that's why the Donbass, they did withdraw from that Donbass region, right? Which is why basically, that's why there was literally very little progress in that region specifically, because the Ukrainians didn't abandon their fortified positions. They maintained them there, right? So just keep that in mind, especially when these people try and go online and say that, the Ukrainians are the warmongers, the Ukrainians were shelling, the region, etc., etc. Well, no. And just, the Russians are always, I should know this too, the Russians are always passive aggressive, right? Like the Russians, the Chinese, they do all these passive aggressive things. You just have to go and look at what they do with their air forces are always buzzing the borders of allied countries, trying to go and test them to see what will happen. They launch drones that randomly, explosive drones that randomly go inside of the borders of NATO countries, and they'll do this. These are provocations. They cut they cut the internet cable to, the Nordic region, right? They'll do these things because this is what they do. They try and do all these little provocations to see what they can go and get away with. China's even worse with this, right? Where they'll go and, they'll ram ships from the surrounding countries in the South China Sea because they go and claim that whole thing, despite the fact that that is, in complete violation of the laws of the sea, right? Just how maritime borders are supposed to work. They'll just go and claim the entire South China Sea, and then just ridiculous, right? All right. Then Lord Southern, okay, she's quoting a guy named Sam Bauman. My view, and this is Sam Bauman, my view is basically that nuclear war is worth risking for some things, like keeping as much of Europe free and independent of Russia as we can. But I think that's a hard position to hold if you think the extinction of humanity is so bad that avoiding it trumps everything else. Okay, and then Lord Southern goes and said, she parodies him saying, you believe the extinction of humanity is really worse than the invasion of Ukraine? Why, yes, Sam. Yes, I do. Okay, and so, just right off the bat, immediately she's against Ukraine, right? Just immediately right off the bat. And again, this is after she was completely and utterly wrong, right? And by the way, I should mention a lot of these new right types and these libertarians, I have all the posts on them. I have the posts from LouRockwell.com. I have the posts from Twitter. They were all promoting this talking point that, oh no, Russia isn't going to invade. Nobody should be concerned about Russia invading. You're being little imperialists if you think that Russia is going to be invading. They don't think like you, these Russians, and all that. Right, so that's what they were all saying during the build-up to the invasion. And, of course, the propaganda, if you look at the hardcore propaganda against Ukraine, right? So it started during the Trump administration in 2017 and 2018, but really ratcheted up in the 2020/2021 era because, of course, the Russians knew that they were going to go and invade Ukraine, that they were going to go and conquer the place, right? Like that's what they knew they were going to go and attempt to do, right? All right, so keep that in mind. Biden, COVID, war in Ukraine. Wake up, Anon. It's 2016. The Great Meme War is afoot. It's time for your 200th Aeneas Sarkeesian debunk video. All right, so I guess she's sort of parodying like elements of the alt-right here. I guess that's what's happening. I have no idea overall, but yeah, so of course that was what people were concerned about, like in the alt-right, and essentially like the 4chan types, right? Like the 2016 they were talking about Aeneas Sarkeesian and videos, and then I guess there's a report here that there's been more severe stuff since then, serious stuff since then, I guess. All right. Why are the media trying to portray Ukraine as a progressive country? Because they've spent years telling us unprovoked attacks on the far right are justified, so they've rewritten the Ukrainian identity to fit their narrative of good and bad. Okay, it's a fair point, right? Like Ukraine is like a center/center right country, right? Like that's their general social ideas at the moment, and they'll obviously because of the war, you're probably going to see it lean more right, because that's just nationalism gets a boost in wartime periods, right? So, national identity and that. But thing though is that like the media, there's been a ton of different. If you go back and look at like some things like the Guardian was putting up about Ukraine, they were like, oh, Ukraine is a hotbed of far right groups and that sort of thing. And so we've got a lot of different news sources from the media that have gone and portrayed Ukraine in this way, right? And these are all people who I'm going to say they're most likely in bed with Russian propaganda, like the journalists who are supporting that, right? Like that seems very likely to me that they're influenced by them, and then they just want to go and put it out in these major Western media organizations because that has credibility for some people, right? Like, but of course, the more they do that, the less credible those media organizations become. So there you go. All right, then she's interviewing a soldier from a foreign legion in Ukraine. We literally got artillery for 6 days straight, had to drop all of our kit to run and get out. They were wasting ammo just firing at us. On-the-ground reporter and veteran talks about the reality for foreign fighters coming to Ukraine who felt duped by media portrayals. Okay, it's like, that's what trench warfare is like, right? Like, these are... I know some of the foreign soldiers, like, were initially... the ones that were like this, they just left, right? Like, but a lot of the foreign soldiers, of course, were used to fighting wars where, they had air support on, they could call it air support at any time, right? And then in Ukraine, you're getting put into a trench and you don't have the same sort of support. You have like your artillery. The Russians have more artillery. They have more tanks and vehicles than you. So you're basically trying to fight a defensive war with really cobbled together stuff, and your only benefit is that you are smarter than the Russians and you have prepared defensive positions. Like that's what is keeping you going, right? So it's a difficult situation, but I guess there you go. Alrighty. Oh, and this is one of the videos that she did, by the way, which we might get to, where she was like talking about what's the Russian perspective on why they invaded Ukraine, where she went and repeated a bunch of Russian talking points again. All right, so I remember how angry people got when I did a video explaining why Russia invaded Ukraine, but this is exactly why it's important. Reality shatters the idea of quote-unquote bad guys with no grievances or intellect. When the reality shatters, people turn against those who dupe them. So very important, right? So this is probably one of her bigger posts, and that was her biggest video, I think, advocating for the Russian talking points. So, and she's kind of like otherwise a bit slippery and evasive on this whole issue, right? That was her talking about that interview that we just saw talked about. Reddit, and it was exactly what I expected, not impressed at all. Just shows you how many people truly think they're just good guys and bad guys and have their mind blown when bad guys can't explain the nuance of their beliefs. So what? Like, I've talked about this before, but I really do think that this idea of the raging, ranting dictator, right? Like this, the Hitler-esque figure that we've been presented with, right? Like, this isn't reality, right? Like, if go look up what people, for example, in the 30s were saying about Adolf Hitler, right? They're like, oh, that yeah, he's this nice, well-spoken guy who has this great ideas, like these great National Socialist ideas, and that's like that is what you need to look at when you're looking at a dictator. Like they oftentimes are that sort of charming and manipulative person. Assad's the same deal. It's like, oh, how could this guy be a dictator who kills hundreds of thousands of people, displaces millions of people? Look how nice and soft spoken he is. Again, this is oftentimes what these people are like. Okay, like it doesn't mean like yeah, Stalin could write books, Hitler can write books, like Saddam Hussein can write books, he can write novels, like that's oftentimes what these dictators are, because again dictators are off like they're usually people who are you know in terms of intelligence like they're smarter than your average person in society, so yeah, they can do these things, they can go and speak in these sorts of ways, but it doesn't stop what they're actually doing. Like, and in terms of his grievances, again, these are manufactured grievances from Putin. Like they're just they don't exist. Like he went and messed around in a foreign country on the basis that it should all it's Ukrainians are descended from Rus, Russians are descended from Rus. All Rus should be under the Russians. That doesn't follow. It follows no more than saying that England. American society is descended from the English. Canadian society is descended from the English. Australian society is descended from the English. Ergo, all these countries should be under the rule of England, right? It's like it doesn't even fit. Like there's so many nuances that you've lost there, and of course, like even England isn't under the rule of the English, right? It's like it's the British Isles, the United Kingdom, like it's a coalition of various different parties. They, of course, like the monarchs, for example, they're from Germany, right? Like, so basically, it just there's really overstated on a lot of these points, right? So, all right, we'll keep going. So Beyond Joy Gray apparently is actually interviewing someone interesting who's talking about, Russia stealing Ukrainian children. That's cool. Yeah. So, a reminder though, this is a woman who is very much a propagandist now. So she too has gone propaganda since about 2023. Before that, she was kind of, I think, she was more like a generalist left figure, right? And then she goes like, she becomes a sort of figure who, you get cited all these like really wacky, posts that she's made, right? And so Lauren Southern. People on bandwagons can't handle when you ask where their moral outrage is for less popular global crises. Yes, be infuriated with Ukraine's invasion. No, don't allow yourself to be blinded into thinking we're politically involved there because of some moral motivation. So again, always casting doubts on why the West is involved in Ukraine, right? So it's like, oh, we're just there because, corporate interests, right? So it's like you could never be involved in a place because you have actual moral interests. It's because you have, corporate interests. And you know what? If that's what it takes, right? Like if it's just like we have an interest in seeing that Europe is safe, and we want Europe safe because, they're our cultural and business partner, like so be it. Like if that's what it takes to get you to go and be part of a good cause, so be it. Like if that if you are more cynically inclined and you just want to say I just want to do things that are in our national interest, like go ahead and do that, okay? But so for people like me, I'm sort of a mixture of the two, right? Like I'm a mixture of the three things, right? Because I also like what's best for humanity, and I think that the Ukrainians are the best form of best expression of the Rus people at the moment. I think that if the Belarusians and Russians could be more like them, I think that would be beneficial for the Rus ethnic group. Like literally, I think that's a very even that's a good reason for getting involved in a place, right? Like just because you think that the people there they have a better potential, right? They have a better potential to go contribute to humanity. That's even a good place to start. And there aren't very many people that I've heard from the Ukrainian side who will go and make an argument like that, but that's fine. Like this is again me talking. Like this is sort of how I look at the world, and that's just one of the ways I look at. And I also think though that yes, it is in our national interest to go and, including Canada's national interest, to go and see that Russia is brought down its position in the world. Russia is a highly aggressive power, which then goes and is used to expanding, is used to going and getting whatever it wants because, again, it acts petulantly. It goes and portrays itself as being righteously justified in all of its invasions of the world, is the premier supremacist state of our current time. And defeating it will mean that supremacism all across the world will get a major blow, like just an absolutely major blow, and it will send a very solid message that everything that sucks about Europe, which is what Russia represents, that is dead, right? Like, and then you can go and move on with Europe, right? And that's what needs to happen. Like that's what the defeat of Russia will truly represent, and it's what needs to happen. And of course, it's why all these different parties that want Europe to go back to that whole supremacist, mentality, that whole supremacist mindset, right, where you're obsessed over empires and domination and that sort of thing. That's why they want to go and align themselves with Russia and then undermine Europe so that they can go and support Russia, whereas other people across the world want to go and move on from these things, and it'll be for the best when Europe goes and moves on from it as well, right? That's just the reality of the things. Europe doesn't have to do that under the banner of liberalism. If it determines that liberalism is a ideology that needs to be moved on from, there are other alternatives that are coming into the forefront. A sort of like dharmic conservatism, for example, that is a perfectly fine idea that could take over from liberalism. It would be an idea that wouldn't have the flaws of the sort of more supremacist forms of conservatism. It could be very good. It would give a metaphysical component to the whole, to what you can do in Europe. A very old metaphysical idea that would take over from the Christian metaphysic that is sort of the waning Christian metaphysic, I should say, that is in Europe. So just there's a lot of different things that you can go and do there, just a lot of different alternatives. But of course, people like Lauren Southern, they're in with the whole, we want to return to the supremacist state, right? That's what they're like. And so then this is her statement on Tenet Media. I hope you can all appreciate why I've taken my time to make a state. Oh, and by the way, remember that all these people, they they have a bit of a tendency to go and mislead people in all these different statements. They've made, like, the Tim Pool one is just the classic state of, like, what was me? I'm the victim, right? And they're all playing the victim here, despite the fact that, yes, you got caught being part of an influence operation, and your entire shtick is, I didn't know it was an influence operation. Lauren Chen misled me, despite the fact that, you should probably have recognized that, you're being handed all these different little talking points that you're supposed to go and say. It's like, okay, but this is her statement. I hope you can all appreciate why I've taken my time to make a statement. What has happened with the DOJ indictments and Tenet Media is obviously a serious matter. I'm treating it as such. This is also one of those letters that definitely had a lot of lawyer. This is what he's like, your lawyer hands you the statement. It's like, go and put it out there. This is what you're going to say, okay? Because this is all legalese, right? A few short facts. I am not accused of any crimes, and the allegations I've read about in the indictment were unknown to me. True. So Lauren Southern, not directly accused of being one of the influencers who got the money, okay? But, again, part of the organization, so just keep that in mind. I believe I have done nothing wrong. I've always put significant effort into making original and thoughtful videos. My contract gave me full editorial control of all my content. As for speculation about my compensation mirroring other public numbers, this is simply not true. I also understand that CNN reported Lauren Southern is actually the stage name of Lauren Chen. Mainstream media, folks. This is incorrect as well. We are two separate people. Yeah, no kidding. Not so much a mentality, but separate in body, I suppose, yeah. The one thing I will say that generally applies no matter the situation or your politics is that I would highly recommend patience with your conclusions until more information is available. Appreciate all those who are approaching the story with temperance. I will not be commenting further on this matter at this point in time. Yeah, so you tell that Bob phrase there. Yeah, that's definitely the legalese coming out, right? So yeah, this is the statement that her lawyer produced with her, and is like, go and put this out and immediately cut all your ties with Tenet Media, and probably don't say anything about Russia and Ukraine for a while. And that's sort of probably where she's at, right? Again, I should note that one thing to remember is that I'm focusing on what they're saying about Ukraine. I have a little bit of minor stuff about Israel, but I'm focusing on stuff about Ukraine, and a lot of these influencers like Lauren Southern, Dave Rubin, right? They're not going to be talking mostly about Ukraine, right? They're going to be talking mostly about the new right talking points as far as the politics in the U.S. are concerned. Okay, so but it's definitely possible that you can go and have Russian dictated points, right? They're coming from these this association with Russia, right? Again, like these big business types and venture capitalists that are associated with Russia. Your David Sachs, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, these sorts of guys, Donald Trump, right? And so it's entirely possible that you can go and get talking points from these guys that want to go and essentially stir up a bunch of drama and politicization in the U.S. And that is your contribution rather than being a propagandist for Russia, like your Benny Johnsons or your Hansen, as we'll see later on. So, anyways, that's been Lauren Southern. I'm going to get back to Lauren Chen last, okay, because she is the most important one, being the head leader of this organization. Next, we're getting to Taylor Hansen, and this is going to be Benny Johnson tier of Russian propaganda, even even starting a little bit further into, yeah, okay. So Taylor Hansen, a reminder, this is like just weeks after that invasion started, right? Like just March 17th, 2022. Ukraine virtue signaling everywhere you go in Texas. I wonder if these dealerships did this for Palestine, Syria, or Yemen. I doubt it. Via flag codes, are you not supposed to fly another country's flag at the same height as ours? Oh, what a bit of pedantry. Like, no, you're. I think the actual rule about the flag codes, if I recall correctly, is that you're not supposed to go and fly another country's flag higher than yours. But it's like, plenty of people have like here's just a good example, right? Like my grandparents, like at their place, like my step grandpa, right? Like he's from Austria originally, right? So they have like the Austrian flag and the Canadian flag, and they're both just like flanking like different areas, right? And their flag at the same height. And it's like this is it's what you see when you see people traveling around, and it's like well, and really like are people going to be like the police have actual stuff to do? Like they're not going to really go and be like just obsessed about this. So, but it's just him being petty and obsessively trying to go and promote like this martyr complex for Americans in regard to Ukraine, which is ridiculous given that Ukrainians are literally the ones that are fighting and dying in Ukraine. All right, Ukraine is not our problem. America is. So again, like no understanding, right? Like there's this guy's also a complete isolationist, right? So it's like no understanding that your foreign policy, like the network of friends that you make around the world, they are actually things that make your country strong. Like literally, these are things that make your country strong, which is why even you can go look at countries that have, a lot weaker partnerships, right? Like, so you take like Japan for example, right, where Japan has like the third or fourth largest economy in the world, right? But it doesn't have the same sort of ally networks that could go and propel a country that that would be suggestive of Japan being like sort of almost a superpower, right? Like or at least a very great power. But Japan doesn't have that sort of political sway, political pull, right? Because it doesn't have as good an alliance of countries that are associated with it, right? It's trying to go and make up for that by going having better deals with the Philippines, South Korea, Taiwan, India, right? Like that sort of alliance is really capable of going and doing stuff, right? Like that would be a very mighty alliance if it could go and pull it off, and if it could go and have these tight ties with all those countries. Then you can start looking at these countries as being great powers. But yeah, so all that to say though is that the U.S. being aligned with the EU with like Canada, right? The Canada, US, the Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, being aligned with again Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, even nowadays like approaching a line, the Arabic countries like Saudi Arabia, its allies, and Israel. Then even nowadays approaching India, right, as a potential partner, like that is a mighty, mighty, mighty alliance. Like that can take on anything, right? Like if you think, like me personally, like I've been very one of the things that I'm very agitated about in Canadian politics, right, is that there's been this attempt to go and sabotage very much that alliance with that newfound partnership with India, right? So where it's like, oh, we're going to spend time monkeying around with in India, and we're doing it for literally no reason, and we're just trying to tick off the Indians. When it's like the reality is that India is like the last component of that alliance, and if that last component is put together, well then you have an alliance that can literally take on anything, and you can go and contain China, right? Like China can't do anything if you have like just all those allies around it. Like just it can't do anything, right? So that'll like entirely stop the war hawks of China from being able to do anything, which is good, right? Because you know you want if you can hold off China's aggression until the millennials, like that millennial Zoomer generation, gets into power, they won't want to fight anyone, right? Like it's just the ones that are the warhawks are all the older generations. But if you go and hold it off until the younger generations get in, which is like you give yourself 20 years or something, if you can hold off China being engaged in a war until then, like you can basically go and you'll piece them out. It probably won't be they'll probably just end up being a socialist country after that too. Like they won't be a hardcore communist country. Like this is so if you can just go and wait them out, and yeah, you can go and isolate them, and then that's just that's what you're looking at, right? So, but which is all just to say that yes, alliances are important and they are part of your country's strength. Alrighty, so we have a little message from Sarah, a message about Gonzalo Lira and Russian propagandists everywhere. We're coming for every one of you. I should clarify that Sarah got into trouble for that post, right? Got removed from the I believe this was the post that got Sarah removed from the spokesperson, right, position in the Ukrainian TDF, right? TDF was the one that Sarah's involved in, right? But anyways, so like literally you're talking about a post that got someone, I think removed from their position. But as far as the propagandists, they're coming for you. I mean, it's like, yeah, there are different ways that you can go interpret that, right? So it's like, yeah, you're of course going to interpret it as violent, but and then Taylor Hansen, in Ukraine we believe in free speech. Journalist Gonzalo Lira was found dead in a Ukrainian prison today. So that implies that the Ukrainians totally went to murder this helpless little journalist Gonzalo Lira. And of course, Gonzalo Lira was promoting Russian propaganda. He was caught spying twice for the Russians, literally twice for the Russians, like relaying them information about Ukrainian positions, right? That's one of the reasons why he was on the frontline city at Kharkiv. Just ridiculous stuff, okay? But he died of pneumonia, right? Like, and to clarify, like my grandma, right? She died of pneumonia. I've like recently lost a few animals one animal from pneumonia. Okay, it's not something that you can go and mess around with. It's a very deadly condition because, of course, it affects your lungs, your ability to breathe. And Coach Red Pill was a compulsive chain smoker, so his lungs were already in terrible shape. So lungs that are in terrible shape, pneumonia, like you tell me what you think is going to happen. Like you have a massively increased chance of dying. And no, so he was not executed, he was not killed, he was simply they didn't. Here's the thing, he's a US citizen, okay? Like I know he was living in Ukraine, but he was a US citizen, right? So they're not going to just kill a US citizen that's in their custody, no matter how much he's like despised by the general person of the US, right? Taylor Hansen, you're being psyoped right now. The only reason the Russian versus Ukrainian story is getting the spotlight is because the cathedral wants it to. Oh boy. Ironic they uses that sort of terminology, right? Because if you go and look up what Pope Francis has to say, Pope Francis is a complete vatnik, right? Like a bunch of these different far-right conservative Christian types, well, guess what? They're also vatniks. So you're using the term cathedral, and, well, from what I can tell, the cathedral actually is supportive of Putin. Unless you want to tell me that you're using the cathedral in somehow some other way that doesn't imply its association with Roman Catholicism or these other Christian groups, in which case I guess I'd ask you, well, what exactly are you using this term for? Anyways, uh, if Putin wants to take Ukraine, it's none of our business. The U.S. needs to learn to keep its hands to itself. That's from December 6th, 2021. So before the invasion, a reminder, like they were ratcheting this propaganda up even then, right? And look at that. So the U.S. needs to learn to keep its hands to itself. So somehow Russia doesn't need to learn to keep its hands to itself, despite the fact that it has a compulsive desire to go and seize territory. And reminder, like, look at the comparison of the U.S. The U.S. used to have the Philippines. The Philippines currently has 100 million people in it. Like, the U.S. let that go independent, like, after World War II. They were planning to do it before World War II, but World War II obviously went and delayed it for a few years. But, yeah, they let the Philippines go independent. And, again, could you imagine Russia letting the Philippines go independent? Like, letting that many people go free? No, you could not. You could not. Could you imagine China doing it? Of course not. China won't release any of their regions, right? No matter how much the Uyghurs would love to be not a part of China, right? They won't go and do that. So, yep, the U.S. is not the problem in the world, and yeah, just double standard, right? Just absolutely another double standard. And this, by the way, is the guy who absolutely hates America, right? And here's him proving it. I will not fight in a foreign war for the interests of the military-industrial complex, no matter the cost. American men do not need to shed a drop of blood for Ukraine or Israel. The draft is illegitimate and should never be taken seriously by men called to serve. Break your legs if you have to. Dying for a country that hates you is not worth it. And you'll note here that this is, like, Radar was claiming, oh, the House passes a military bill automatically registering men 18 to 26 for the draft. Remember, it's legally speaking, you in the U.S. you have to go and register for the draft. So, in Canada, for example, we do not have this, right? Where we probably will in the future because military recruitment has big issues in Canada, right? But part of that's also due to some of the politics around the thing. But I won't get into that now. But anyways, the point being that men are automatically now registered for the draft in the U.S. Okay, but let's take a look at this guy's terminology. Again, I've noted this is an excellent example of how, again, the right wing takes a bunch of left wing terminology, right, and then goes and applies it to their causes, right? So, foreign war, interests of the military-industrial complex. Remember, that's the contention of the communists and the far left, right? That throughout the Cold War, that, oh, you're just doing this because you want to go and fund your military establishment. You want your military companies to go and get, billions of dollars in funding. That's the only reason why you fight wars. It's not because you have actual, moral reasons. You just want resources and you want your military to go and military construction companies to go and be funded. Like, that's just it. Shed a drop of blood for Ukraine or Israel. Neither Ukraine or Israel have asked for American soldiers. And and he has contempt for both these countries, of course. We'll see later on. He's very, very clear about how much contempt he has for Israel, which is very interesting. Israel and Judaism, because of course this is another one of those hyper ultra Christian guys, right? Draft is illegitimate. Nope. Is legal. 100% legal, right? Like, illegitimate when imply that something is illegal, when it is legal, and then dying for a country that hates you, right? This is the stick, right? Dying for a country that hates you. So again, he says, oh, young men, America hates you. Just, it's ridiculous stuff, right? Ridiculous stuff. Like, you'd be frustrated with what your, elements in America are doing, right? But you shouldn't go and say that, your country hates you, because, again, if, like, in America, you have so many different options too, right? Like, if you are unsatisfied with the place that you live, if you think it's too left-wing or right-wing, you just literally go move to another state that's right-wing or left-wing or centrist. Like, just, there's so many different options that you can go and do in the U.S., right? Like, you don't have to go and stay in places. And even in even in places that are, like, states that are right-wing or left-wing, like, literally, you go to a right-wing state and you go to the big city in that state, that's probably a left-wing city. You go, in your left-wing state, you go to, like, a small rural town, it's probably right-wing. Like, just, That's how. See, like that's a lot of times how these things work. So it's just you have to go and decide where you want to be located. And of course, yes, that's a big major. Yeah, it's simplified, right? Because of course there are cities that lean right wing. There are towns in certain areas that are left wing, right? Rural areas that are left wing. It's just these things are more typically about certain sides, right? Okay, we can keep going. Ukraine is the new Afghanistan. Ukraine is not our problem. Joe Biden is going to be in Fort Worth, Texas today. It would be a shame if someone heckled him about his family's special money interests in Ukraine. I've debunked all these points, right? But, we'll keep going. I wonder if Joe Biden made any fundraising calls to Ukraine today. Again, from 2020, right? So already hates Ukraine in 2020, right? Way before the war started, but when they were starting to ratchet up this propaganda full tilt, right? So that they could go and paralyze all of the conservative types that, the conservative types, remember, they looked at Eurobiden, they went, oh, look, these guys are literally smashing symbols of communism, right? This is pretty cool, right? This is what they're doing. This is what the new Ukrainian state is like. The Ukrainians are still like that. They still go into places and they smash the symbols of communism, of the Soviet Union, whereas the Russians go and slam symbols of the Soviet Union, of communism over everything. And then the Russians get the support of all these far right types anyways, which raises a question like, what are these far right types really about? Like they, not really seeming to be about conservative ideology, more about support for authoritarianism. Weird, isn't that? Not about any sort of religious morality, or at least it's more about like the manipulative side of religious morality. Weird. Just all that stuff, right? Can we get a refund, please? Can't believe you people actually think Ukraine is winning this war. This is responding to a post from Defense of Ukraine. Morning Pikachu dance. Winter has never been an obstacle to a good mood. So there, a soldier having a bit of fun in a military situation, in a situation where there's horrific elements going on around, right? Where he's in like a sort of trench sort of situation, and literally just does a little dance and then posts it, and then people think that's funny, and then it's like a little morale boost, right? And then of course being Taylor Hansen, he's like, oh, I can't believe people think Ukraine is winning this war. Look at this guy's doing a little Pikachu dance. Ugh. Yeah, just that's crap, right? And anyone in the military would know that this is crap, but of course this guy has absolutely no idea of what the military is like. And you know what? Which brings up another great point, right? Like, just all these far right, like the new right types, right? They all want to go say, oh, we're so supportive of the military, etc. Like, have any of them ever actually talked with the military and see what the military guys actually think about the Ukrainians? Because the military guys are really highly supportive of the Ukrainians. Like, they think that they're very heroic. Like, they were an extremely good morale boost for military units in the Western world that had been really torn down during that whole COVID era because the military went and did extremely heavy crackdowns, right? Like the point is that the military, they needed a way of getting a morale boost, right? Like they needed a morale boost, and the Ukrainians, like looking at how heroic the Ukrainians are, that is a big morale boost for the military. That did a lot for the military. Like you probably wouldn't even have a lot of the guys that are in the military currently without the Ukrainians, right? So just like, and that's given all the other problems that are going around with the military, right? Like they're just getting criticized from the left and right. They're there's a lot of propaganda against joining the military, of course, again supported by the Russian and Chinese elements in society, right? Those linked elements. Just and then getting torn down because a bunch of people like in the officer corps wanted to go and abuse their power during the whole COVID situation, right? Like just this is what's going on here with the military, and they needed a bunch of pick me ups, right? Like so this is a good thing for the Western societies, but of course because it's good for the West, Taylor Hansen hates it. Wanting to defend our own borders equal terrorism. Wanting to defend Nazi Ukraine borders equal heroic. Wanting to defend Nazi Ukraine borders equal heroic. Yeah. So there you have it. Like again, just throwing around slang terms, like slagging them off. Again, these are guys who, like, themselves have been promoting guys like Hitler unironically recently, right? All right, and this was actually him talking about that whole yeah, that little Pikachu dance again. This reminds me of when nurses were making TikToks in the midst of the deadliest pandemic ever. No one should take Ukraine seriously, and we sure as hell shouldn't be sending them any money while the U.S. is barely holding itself together. The U.S. is not just barely holding itself together; it's doing decently at the moment. Yeah, there's a financial issues in the world because, of course, again, it's like the world was shut down and crippled for 2020 and 2021. It's like, of course, there are going to be financial issues that come on that. Ukraine never had a chance. Again, just all these different talking points. Remember, this is like the propaganda point that Trump wants. So it's like, oh, Ukraine doesn't have a ability to win this war, therefore, etc., etc., etc. Your further has expanded. All is good fighting men and now women. Ukraine never had a chance. Nice propaganda, though. Again, Ukraine is not. Like, remember, like, they just brought up, like, they have, like, that Kharkiv, or uh, the offensive into Kursk that they just did, right? Like, that was using a whole bunch of different fresh brigades, and they've been estimated to have like 12 to 16 fresh brigades that they could go and put into combat, right? Like, that's what they've got at the moment. They were just holding them in reserve because they didn't want to go and commit their forces when, they wanted to go and have this force that could go and actually do a counterattack. And by the way, this is what that counterattack, like, the counterattack should have been into the direction of Kursk and Belgorod. Like, that's where they should have counterattacked, but their allies, like the bad elements in the Western countries that, they're undermining Ukraine, essentially, they were like, oh no, you can't go and attack into Russia, despite the fact that attacking into Belgorod and Kursk was the obvious choice. Like, that was the obvious choice. And then, because otherwise you're literally attacking into prepared formations, right? They're like hypermined inside of those Russian occupied territories to the south of Ukraine, right? Like, that's very much the difficulty, and those can't really truly be counterattacked into unless you go and take out elements like the Kursk Bridge and the rail transport network, right? So the obvious counterattack point for, the counteroffensive, right? Like, that happened in 2023. Like, the obvious attack point there was Belgrade and Kursk, and that was what I think the Ukrainians would have wanted to do. But again, it's what the Allies were constraining them. So Ukraine's literally had to fight with one hand tied behind their back their whole time, and they're still managing to take on Russia, right? Still managing to take them on. All right, and then I actually, so basically, my thought here is that, okay, I always like to see what these guys have to say on religion and that sort of thing, right? Because they use Christianity as sort of one of their identifiers, right? They use Christendom as this excuse for, this form of Western civilization, this authoritarian form of Western civilization that they want. So they use it via Christianity. It'll always be ironic, right? Because, like, Jesus, hyper libertine guy, right? Like, you go and look at the stuff that's said about him. He's a hyper libertine guy, right? Like, he's not like a conservative whatsoever. Like, he's literally a leftist, right? Like, that's literally what Jesus is, right? But tear up the old books, tear up the old law. We're gonna go and install something entirely new. I'm gonna go and sit with tax collectors and sinners and drink wine with them and all this sort of thing, and even some more extensive stuff that we won't get into nowadays. But and then this guy goes and gets turned into like this ultra conservative religious figure. It's like, just ridiculous, right? But anyways, that figure has very little to do with whatever you see in Christianity nowadays. All right. Christianity is growing, actually. The only thing dying here is people killing themselves because they didn't get proper help for their gender dysphoria. If you're a truly compassionate person, you would support doing away with the trans ideology. All right. So again, like, another thing that they're obsessed about, which is, again, like, this whole the whole gender spectrum thing in the Western world, right? Like, that's again, go look up what it's talked about with subgroups there, right? Like, it's definitely a politicized subgroup that's being run by someone to go and get people in their own faction, but that's also sort of a case of you create this issue and then you want to go and sell the cure, right? And so like how many transgender people do you know who are actually happy with society, right? Like they're almost always these like far left socialist types. Like that's just what I've seen from them, right? And um, so basically, I think my point there is that they wouldn't exist without Russia, essentially, right? Like they wouldn't exist without the Soviet Union. Um, at best, we'd say that a lot of the elements of their ideology might like come from like the far left in France, for example, like that whole the French Commune, right? Like that's their big contributor to world history. Like some oftentimes like understated. But my point is that so basically you have people who are created because of social dissatisfaction. You have this other group that are socially dissatisfied, and they're like these different dissatisfied groups that you're fighting over, right? So you don't need to really deal with either of these people, though. It's there. I think that this whole like this will go away not too soon. The more significant post though is this one below, right? There's no such thing as Judeo-Christianity. Judaism is not a friend of Christianity. So, yeah, this is. I believe this is actually from that whole Christ is King era, right? Like where they were talking about that. It's just no, actually, sorry, it wouldn't be it. This is much later, but this is in the aftermath of that, right? Yeah, it's in the aftermath of that. But basically, yeah. So it's like Judaism is no friend of Christianity. All right, and here he is going even further with that. Islam isn't a friend to Christianity, but if you had to choose to ally yourself with Islam, is Islam isn't a friend to Christianity, but if you had to choose one to ally yourself with, Islam is better than Judaism. Islam mobilizes while Christians don't. Yeah, it's like, okay, buddy, okay, like, this is just a pretty good summation of their ideology, right? So it's like, I hate Judaism so much that I'm going to go and say that, we should ally ourselves with, Islam. Just, yeah, all for the sake of this Christianity that's basically just this religious dressing to serve my, new right ideology, my new right ideas that I want to go and follow, how I want to go and reshape society. I'm going to do it under the banner of being a white Christian, right? Like that's essentially what they're like. So it's Taylor Hansen.
It's dreadful, awful, worst place around. So much thinking, creaking, morally unprofound. This country's gone down the drain, and I'm ashamed to call it by name. Scream so much on Twitter, but still nothing seems to change. Getting really ticked off hearing something's gotta change. Things around here ain't perfect, and that's not right for me. Things around here ain't perfect, so let's burn the stage and street. Got a new game plan to shake things right up. You can play at dirty, don't need clean hands, surely. I'm talking on the internet, engaging in free thought. People are talking shit, and my head bobs as I agree. Things around here ain't perfect, and that's not right for me. Things around here ain't perfect, so let's burn the stage and street. Got a new game plan to shake things right up. Play it at dirty, don't need clean hands, surely. And talking on the internet, engaging in free thought. People are talking shit, and my head bobs as I agree. Got a new game plan to shake things right up. You can play at dirty, don't need clean hands, surely. And talking on the internet, engaging in free thought. People are talking shit, and my head bobs as I agree. So now I think, why should I be poor? Can get a sweet payout for spitting truths, and with bots I won't be ignored. Regretting your choices yet? I laugh at so-called countrymen. I don't owe you scum any loyalty time, cause you're the enemy to me, and the man in Moscow agrees. I'll call you Satan, you like how that sounds. I'll call you globalist, you like how that sounds. I'll call you communist. Oh hey, my check from Beijing just clear, where was I? Oh yes. I'll call you banksters, you like how that sounds. I'll call you devils, you like how that sounds. I'll call you well, whatever I'm told to. This is the truth movement, baby. We tell truths here, the ones we're paid to tell. We're all about the truth and about the money. Call myself a hardcore Christian, so I'm gonna praise China's new system. Only critique is internal, yo, cause evil from only one source does flow. You're all Satan, we're God. a fiber. I welcome our new overlords, oh yes I do, oh yes I do. Freedom's collapsing everywhere and I'm cheering it all, oh yes I do, oh yes I do. I welcome our new overlords, oh yes I do, oh yes I do. Freedom's collapsing everywhere